so today what I thought I would do is a little mini buyer's guide for the Cavalier, particularly focusing today on the bodywork. Cavaliers do like to rust pretty much anywhere, so if you're thinking of buying one, I'm going to just show you some of the places that you can look that they'll rust. Now they can rust anywhere, but the places I'm going to show you are maybe the hardest places to repair, so that might be something to think about when you're trying to decide what car to buy. This Cavalier that I'm showing you is pretty much an example of what good looks like. It is 28 years old, it's not perfect, but in all the critical areas it is really solid, and the MOT tester said that as well. So this will show you kind of what it should look like when it's not rusty. Right, so starting off at the front of the car, basically Cavaliers can rust anywhere, and I'm not going to be able to show you everything because the car's currently in my garage and I can't really get underneath the front of it, but I can certainly explain that plenty, where to look. So one of the most notorious areas that Cavaliers can rot is on the bulkhead, and the steering rack is bolted to the bulkhead, so that is an MOT fail, and it's actually just down to a design flaw. There's not really much you can do about it, and I'll show you why. I'll use my pry bar to point, so I don't need to reach down in front of the camera. So what you'll see here, let's get the camera into a suitable position, and then we'll stay there. Right, let's focus. There we go. So that there is the hole for the steering rack to come through, and you'll see at the moment that's actually quite damp. So I was out in the car in heavy rain the other day, and what happens is water comes in there. This chassis rail is angled, and that's your bulkhead there. Now you zoom in, that there, that's sound deadening, so that has got inevitable results. Now I've actually just looked behind this today, and it is absolutely solid. I'm very lucky. Don't know if I can see behind there. Let's see. Yeah, you can see a little bit of blue paint. So nice and solid behind there. So I'm lucky. But yeah, as you can see, that sound deadening is kind of damp. It is a bit damp. So that's why I've left the bonnet open to dry it out. So water sits there, rots that, and eventually what happens, put down the pry bar, is here you can see the steering rack where it bolts to the bulkhead. Now that lower bolt, sorry everything's getting in the way here, there's a lower bolt there, that's just behind the actual track rod there, and if the bulkhead goes rotten there, with inevitable results. Right, so staying with the bulkhead, the other problem that you can have is water ingress into usually the passenger footwell. What can happen is these are made of brittle plastic and they can split, and underneath there is the heater box. So two things can happen. One is they can split and water can get straight in through the heater box and into your footwell. There's also a seal around the heater box where it sits on the metal bulkhead underneath. That seal can perish and the water will get in, and ultimately what will happen is it'll rot the floors, so just to bear that in mind. Strut tops can rust down in there, that corner there. They're okay on this car. The other thing that can rust, and you can't really see it in this picture because we're on top of the car, is just check your subframes. That's it there. Now this car's got an oil leak, as you can see from there, so that's actually preserved the subframe there. The subframe also bolts underneath the car. Under here there's a cross member that runs under here behind the bumper. That can rust as well, both on top if you've had a leak in the radiator and underneath from all your road salt. And the subframe also bolts down into there and behind there, so again have a look at that area as well. If you've got a petrol engine one, you'll see in the diesel engine, that's your engine mount there on top. Now the petrol one, you can actually see the holes there. See those two holes, that one there and that one there. What happens is there's actually a seam just behind those two holes which can rust really badly, and that's obviously going to compromise your engine mount. If it's a petrol model, I've seen quite a few Cavaliers rust there as well, so bear that in mind. Let's move round to the side of the car now, and then we'll move on to the back. Right, the other areas that Cavaliers can rust are the sills and the front jacking points, so let's take a look at those. The other place to look, take off these plastic arch liners, and the bottoms of the wheel arches can rust there. And you can see mine's been welded there in the past. You just see that there. It's been done to a good standard, so we're grand. And just have a wee look up the inner arch while you're there. Just make sure everything's okay. Check your brake lines while you're at it as well. And mine are grand. That seam I was talking about, so mine's just got a wee bit of surface rust there, but have a good look at that seam. It's in front of the crank pulley. You see that square hole there? It's actually meant to be another arch liner in there. It protects your crank pulley, but it does more harm than good. Water gets in there between the two seams and rots it out. This one's okay, just a wee bit of surface rust on it, but it's alright. I've had a look. And the diesels, it doesn't do anything anyway. It's more in the petrols where the engine actually bolts to that bit of the chassis. Keep an eye out for it. So the other area that it can rust is your front jacking points, which you can see there, and they're alright on this car. So these are available as complete panels. Something to bear in mind. The subframe bolts in as well, just ahead of there, so watch that as well. Obviously all along your sills, have a good look. Another place to look for Cavaliers is your outer and inner arches at the back. So you can see this one's just got a tiny wee bubble, but these are the original arches in this car, so they've done pretty well. Have a good look where your suspension beam bolts to the chassis like this. See how there's two levels. There's an outer level, there's an outer level there, and an inner level there. So we'll look at that for the other side. That is where Cavaliers go the worst. The outer one can look okay, but the inner one can be absolutely howling. Look at your rear inner arches there as well, where that's actually a seam running right up there. That can go pretty bad. Mine are grand. Look all around them, damper mounts. Now there's a fuel filler neck up here as well, so make sure you look all around that. Sorry about the crazy angles. Let's try to see if I can focus in. Sorry about the crazy angles hurting your neck, but you get the idea. Just look everywhere. And there's a nice lip for collecting muck as well. Have a look at that. Right, let's get underneath. So one of the most notorious and most difficult to repair grot spots on a Cavalier is this area here, right where the spring sits. Now you can see in mine there's a little bit of surface rust, but it isn't too bad. Nothing of any concern. Right the way along there, and also in front of the spring. Don't think we're going to get to that bit. Can we see it in this video? Let's see if you can see around the other side. Ah yeah, right. This lip here is just to the side of the spring all the way down. And that rots as well. And all the way down the front of the chassis leg. And indeed, all the way back. So that is a notorious grot spot for Cavaliers. So if you're buying one, that's one of the critical places I would look. The other place as well is the rear damper mounts. Let's just get that in focus. It's not going to focus, but you can see roughly where I'm talking about. And just right above me, it's a bit wet, and I'll show you it from the inside as well. The corners of the boot floor, and that little round thing is your sunroof drain as well. That's where they rot around. You can see mine's had a little bit of a coating of underseal, but it's all good. So this Cavalier's very solid underneath, as you can see. So the other place to inspect your boot corner is much easier. It's just to look at it from above. You can see here that that is just starting to go, but nothing to worry about. It's got a coating underseal for the other side. That's certainly not worth doing anything with it at this point in time. This car's also got a tow bar, so you've got a cross member which is just behind the back bumper under here. That can cause that to rot, so check that carefully. There's also kind of sound deadening material here, and that can promote rust. Have a look at your damper mounts as well. You can look in this little hatch as well, and that gives you a good view of the inner wing. Just lets you see what's what. Your later models with the infill panel, these are quite hard to find in mint condition. What happens is these lights basically just crack up. What I did was I just went around with some super glue and just tried to stabilise it all. Couldn't find a replacement one, and again, as long as they're still whole, I'm not bothered too much about it. They don't have any light output, so it doesn't affect anything for the MOT. Most Cavies have got a tow bar as well. I'll say elsewhere in my video that that can cause issues with the cross member, where it bolts into the cross member and two bits of metal sandwiched together, and it can cause rust. In here as well can get pretty grotty. This one's nice and clean, but again, just have a quick look in there. On to engines. I don't really know a great deal about engines in Cavaliers, other than the ones that I've owned. I do know that when the car was launched, the smaller petrol engines had carburetors. I think the SRI would have had the 2 litre multi-point injection, C2O SEH. In 1989, the GSI 2000 was launched. That had the red top, 2 litre 16 valve, naturally aspirated, 150 brake horsepower, very sought after. Not sure if there was any diesel models as early as that. As the 90s dawned, you could get a naturally aspirated diesel engine based in the petrol block, and this one here, which is the Isuzu 1.7 TD. There was also a 2 litre 16 valve turbo and turbo 4x4, very desirable those. There was also a C25XE V6. So that's pretty much all I know about engines and Cavaliers, other than the ones I've had and how to fix those. The other thing I can tell you is that after about 92, the 1.6, 1.88 valves became single point fuel injection. You can tell this because they've got a little circular top hat section here. The multi-point fuel injection 2 litre models, they had like a metering head here, a chunky metal piece of machinery there. All Cavalier engines will have a timing belt. You need to obviously make sure those are changed. The early 8 valves, both carburetor and single point injection ones, very long lived. The green one I had 226,000. The Isuzu turbo diesel, also very long lived. The only weakness they've got really are head gaskets, but even that is not that common. Also quite tunable. The 2 litre 16 valve Ecotech's probably the least desirable. I think the Ecotechs are not favoured as much because it's a kind of a modern engine in an old school Vauxhall, so it's kind of conflicting, but I'm sure there's lots of happy owners out there. Red top and V6 models do command a bit more of a premium. Certainly the red top turbos and 4x4s are, for a good one, it's £10,000 plus. So whatever one you get, just make sure it's been looked after, but it really shouldn't give you too many problems. Interiors and cavies, generally pretty hard wearing. The seats can go a bit saggy. These ones don't look the best, if I'm honest, but they're pretty hard wearing with just a tiny wee hole there. It's not bad for 30 years old. Various specs over the years. This is an early facelift one, so it's got the nice non-airbag steering wheel. Later models had a sort of digital display there, some had airbags and whatnot. Door cards, the front can split there, but it depends how bothered you are about that. I'm not. Your gear gaiter and handbrake gaiters can go. One thing that gets pretty ropey in calves is the headlining. As you can see, mine is pretty bad. It's held up with a lot of drawn pins. That's just a few of them. It's nothing to do with water ingress though, it's just the glue dries out. The back's not bad though, there's a wee bit hanging down behind that headrest, but it's not too bad. But it's not the best, but depends how much you care about that. I don't. I'm really bothered about mechanical and the chassis, but something to bear in mind. And the last thing to bear in mind if you're buying a Cavi or any Vauxhall at this age is the paint tends to fall off after about 20 years. So this one's got pretty bad lacquer peel all the way up there, and the roof, this paint's terrible. But it doesn't bother me, but again, it's something to think about. Does it bother you or not? As long as it's not rusty. There's not much you can do about that other than a respray, but for a 950 quid car, I don't care about that. So that's the end of my wee buyer's guide. I don't know as much about Cavaliers as some people do. I'm fairly new to them, but I've seen quite a few rusty examples, so particularly on the bodywork side, I just thought I would share that. Hopefully you found it useful. If there's anything you want to add to it, or anything I've said that's not correct, just let me know in the comments, or if you've got a Cavalier, I'd be happy to hear about it. Cheers.